based St. Patrick's Day feast. So we're going to be making an Irish stout stew. We're going to be making colcannon, which is traditionally made with cabbage and potatoes, but we're making it with a little bit of a twist, and a shamrock shake. Very excited about all three of these things because I am starving, and also it smells so good in here already. So can't wait. We're going to start with preparing our Irish stout stew. So what I have here are onions and carrots, almost ready with the potatoes, but not quite. So onions and carrots here, and I've got a nice, very heavy soup pot over here that's been heating up at about medium-low heat. I'm going to put a little bit of oil on the bottom there, and then get ready because it's going to be loud. It's hot. Oh yeah. So just get the onions and the carrots kind of spread out on the bottom of this pan. And once they have formed kind of a bed on the bottom of the pot, I'm going to swap some garlic in there because, of course, you can't make a good stew if you don't have garlic. So adding just a few cloves of crushed garlic. And the reason why I waited until I had the onions and the carrots in there is because I don't want the garlic to burn. So I'm kind of making sure that it lands on top of the onions and the carrots, so it's a little bit of insulation. I'm also going to turn on this pot right here. This has my cut potatoes for the colcannon. Colcannon is mashed potatoes, usually mixed with steamed or sauteed cabbage or kale and or leeks. Tonight, we're going to be making our colcannon with Brussels sprouts, onions, and shallots. And I wanted to show you how I was cutting up the Brussels sprouts for this, because we want it to be cut small, but not shredded to the point where it just disappears once it hits the oven. So I'm cutting off the bottom of the Brussels sprout. I'm taking off these outer leaves, making sure it's fairly clean. And then instead of shredding it very finely, I'm going to cut it into, this is kind of a big one. So I'm cutting it in about 4 pieces. And then I'm going to drizzle it with a little bit of olive oil. By a little bit, I mean quite a lot because I like it to be nice and crispy. Seasoning it with a little bit of salt. Tossing it all around in there because I want the oil and the salt to get into the onions and the Brussels sprouts and the shallots. And my oven is set at 350 degrees, so good and preheated. I'm just putting this on a regular old baking sheet. I'm going to make sure we get all of that good stuff out. And just spreading it out evenly so that it all cooks pretty evenly. The hope and the expectation is that by the time the potatoes are done boiling, our Brussels sprouts and onions and shallots will be nice and soft. A little bit crispy, hopefully, on some of it, but mostly just caramelized and soft from being in the oven. The other thing that I want to put in the oven is the mushrooms. So Irish stew is normally made with lamb or maybe beef. Obviously, we're not going to do that, seeing as this is a plant-based, non-animal product cooking show. But we can use mushrooms because mushrooms tend to be a pretty good analog for meat, especially in things like soups and stir fries and things like that. So I have here a bunch of baby bellas. They've been stemmed and cleaned. And again, a little bit of oil and just a little tiny bit of soy sauce. Not because I want them to taste like soy and not because I'm making this some sort of like Asian Irish fusion, but because it's going to add a nice richness to the mushrooms and make it taste a little bit more meaty once they've been roasted. We're not going to roast them very long because we don't want them to completely dry out, but we do want some of the water to be cooked out of them so that once they get into that Irish stew, they soak up all of the flavor and they have a really good firm texture. So those are going to get added to the oven as well. So then come over here. Let's see how my onions and carrots are doing. Now, a note about this. Most recipes with any kind of vegetable soup tend to call for celery. And I will be the first to admit that I have said some unkind things about celery in the past. I may have at some point or another equated it with the works of the devil, which of course is not true. I just don't like celery most of the time. However, I do like a little bit the flavor of it in moderation in soup. So instead of buying a big old bunch of celery that I then have to either chop up and freeze and use like a little tiny bit at a time, or let it wilt away in my fridge and make things very sad, I have celery seed here and I ground it up. You can also buy celery seed ground from the spice department of your grocery store or wherever you get your groceries. But this is just a little pinch of celery seed. A couple more. And that will give it kind of a familiar soupy flavor. Most soups, and a lot of sauces as well, have what's called a mirepoix. A mirepoix is onion, carrots, and celery sauteed together because those three flavors are foundational to a lot of other dishes. So if you like celery and you have celery, please use the celery. If you're like me and you just don't really have it around all that much, buy celery seed. It will last you a lot longer. You can use it in coleslaw. See, I love the flavor of celery seed in coleslaw, and I'm accustomed to and enjoy the flavor of celery in something like soup and some kinds of sauces that are based from soup stock. I just don't go through it quickly enough to have celery, fresh celery in the house. So get some celery seed, grind it up, or get some ground celery seed, and you can just use it right out of the jar. But either way, I suppose there are people who like celery, and that's fine, whatever. But if you don't, this is a good solution if you like the flavor of it for some things, as I do. So the onions are starting to get nice and translucent, and the carrots are starting to get brown, which is what we want. A lot of the recipes that I saw suggested starting with the really heavily aromatic vegetables like garlic and onion as you have with celery. I really like putting carrots in with that. Carrots have a wonderfully sweet, rich flavor if you caramelize them a little bit, especially first. If you don't, care for that, then don't put them in first. But I really like the flavor that they get when you kind of toast them and cook them along with your onions and garlic and the other aromatics that you're using from the beginning. While the onions and carrots and garlic and celery seed are cooking, I'm going to chop up our potatoes. For the colcannon, basically it's mashed potatoes as you would ordinarily cook them, and then mixed with cabbage or kale, or in this case Brussels sprouts, and then onions or scallions or leeks, something oniony kind of flavor. And so the potatoes that we're going to be cooking for that are in there getting ready to boil are peeled. For the Irish stew, you want kind of a homely, rustic look, which also is nice because that means you don't have to peel as many potatoes. So here I've got two. I was going for large, but turns out I don't really have any large potatoes. So these are the largest medium-sized potatoes I could find. But I'm just cutting them so that the pieces, once they're cut, are nicely chunked. You don't want them huge, but you don't want them like tiny little diced pieces for vegetable soup or something either. So a manageable size. And I do love potatoes. So the more, the merrier. And it's just a simple matter of cutting them lengthwise and then crosswise. And then you have cut potatoes. Pretty simple. So these vegetables so far are cooking up beautifully. It smells divine. I want to tell you a little bit about the pot that I am using. This is an enameled cast iron pot. The brand is not one that I would ever be able to afford had it not been an unpopular color. I love the color gray. It is actually my favorite color, but for some reason, Williams-Sonoma decided nobody wanted this color gray enameled cast iron pot, and so they put it on some crazy mega sale that I have never seen before or since. But it's a great sized pot. It's 3.5 quarts, and so that lends it to a lot of different things. And the good thing is it's heavy, so it distributes the heat very evenly, the same way a cast iron pot would, but it's also covered in enamel, so you can wash it. Isn't that great? I'm going to turn this camera over here just a little bit so you guys can see what I'm talking about on my stove here. This is the pot I'm talking about, this enameled cast iron pot. And if you can find one that is on sale, grab it, because it is invaluable for long cooking things just like this, and also invaluable when you want something to cook thoroughly but not too quickly, because it distributes the heat perfectly. So now that the onions have turned translucent and the vegetables are getting a little bit brown, I'm going to add my first 2 cups of stock. It calls for a quart altogether, which is 4 cups. So I'm going to add this first 2 cups a little bit at a time. A little bit at a time because I want to deglaze the bottom of this cooking pot. What that means is, as the onions and the carrots and the garlic have cooked, it's not burning at all, but some of the good stuff is sticking to the bottom, and I want that good stuff. That's part of what makes soup taste so good. So I'm going to scoop these vegetables as much as I can off to one side, exposing as much of the bottom of the pan as possible. I'm going to pour in just a little. And as it starts to come to a boil, I'm using my spoon to scrape up all of those little bits on the bottom. And as it gets in there, I'm scooting these vegetables to the other side of the pot so that I can get all the burned up goodies on that side too. It's also very handy to clean up your pot if you want those flavors on the bottom, and trust me, you do. So I'm going to turn the heat up because I'm going to want all of this to come to a boil and pour in the rest of the stock. I have a few cool words about this vegetable stock that I'm using too. It's not the kind that I make. I'll get to that in just a second. So here is all of the vegetable stock, and I've cranked that heat up because I do want it to come to a boil eventually. The other thing I'm going to do is add the potatoes. So these 2 cut potatoes are going in, and I'm going to check on my vegetables that are in the oven. Let me get some tongs. So let's see how our vegetables are doing. All right. So this is great. Our Brussels sprouts have turned this beautiful bright green. So that means they're cooking nicely. And I'm just kind of stirring them around so they cook evenly and spreading them out. They're not getting quite crispy yet, but they are going to get there soon. And, all right. So the mushrooms are right where I want them. I will show you. Okay. So we flip these over because what's happened is these have gotten very beautifully browned. So our mushrooms have gotten this beautiful brown color on there. And all of the liquid, which was in them, has come out if they were kind of turned cap side up. So I'm just flipping them over because they're holding that liquid there, which I want to drain out and kind of steam away. But these are beautiful, beautiful mushrooms, and they're going to be a lot firmer, and the texture is going to be a lot more kind of chunky and meat-like, although I know that does not sound very appealing. That is what we want. It's going to taste a lot better and feel a lot better as we eat it. So all of my mushrooms are flipped over so the rest of that liquid can drain out, kind of steam away on that. And until it comes to a boil, no, it doesn't take any longer. So while that is doing its thing, we're stirring this up, and this is already starting to thicken. But what I'm going to do is sprinkle just a little bit of flour over the top, and because that will help it as it cooks. Same way you would do to instantly thicken gravy, you can do that with soup as well, or you can add the flour to the vegetables as they're cooking in the bottom. And if you're avoiding gluten, you can also use cornstarch to help it to thicken up as well. So just get all your little flour pieces out of there. Stir that up. So the vegetable stock that I was using, let me show you how this works. I ordered this concentrate, okay? So it's this little teeny, and it's hard to tell the size of something when you're ordering something online. So I ordered this thinking it would be like the cartons of stock that I normally get. And when I unpacked this, I thought, are you kidding me? But it says, and I believe it, that this whole little itty bitty tiny container will make up to a gallon of broth. And 1 tablespoon of this stuff makes a cup of broth. So I still had my doubts, but I used it tonight to make the vegetable broth for the Irish stew that we're making. And I was amazed. It's a little weird because it's in that little Tetra Pak. So you unfold the corners and you tear it open, And the stock that's inside is not liquidy at all. It's very goopy, which is not exactly appetizing, but once you mix it with warm or hot water, it is delightful. It smells so good and it tastes really good because I couldn't help but taste a little bit of it, and it was very, very tasty. So I'm very pleased with this much more space saving and space efficient little bit of broth. Of course, I will always make my own broth in addition to whatever I buy, because it just seems, now that I'm in the habit of it, it just seems wasteful to trim onions and carrots and mushrooms and other kinds of soup flavored vegetables and not use them for something. So, but that's good in a pinch. And I'm thinking that that whole thing is worth a gallon's worth of soup stock. That'll last me quite some time. And our potatoes are boiling. So we want to cook them until you can pierce them with a fork, but you don't want them to fall apart when you poke them with a fork. So once they've reached this boiling point and they're already getting nice and soft, you know, around the perimeter of it, you do want to keep an eye on it. So our stew is starting to thicken, just waiting for it to come to a good boil here. Crank up the heat just a little bit more. And what we're going to add when that does happen is an Irish stout. There are plenty of different kinds available. I don't like Irish stout to drink. It is so thick. I make jokes sometimes about it's kind of like trying to drink a loaf of bread because it is just so heavy. But it's great in soups because just like flour and water and butter and all these other things, it can be a wonderful thickening agent. So this is what we're going to use. Ooh. All right. This is what we're going to use tonight to help thicken up the stuff. If you don't like beer, or if you don't want to have it in your food or in your house, the other thing that you can use for a similar flavor is something like cola, a brand of cola, or some kind of good quality root beer where it's not too sweet and has more of an earthy flavor. It's very similar if you use either of those. So if you don't want to use beer, then you can use cola or root beer, or you can just add more stock. And it won't be quite as thick, but it'll still taste really, really good. So we're starting to simmer here. That is a good thing. And I'm going to go ahead and add in the mushrooms, because one of the things that happens when they cook, they lose a lot of their water. And so they're going to happily soak up this really nicely flavored liquid that's in here. All of those good mushrooms in there. Oh yes, oh yes. We're starting to come to a boil. Hooray! So the mushrooms here are going to function in the same way that meat would. They're going to soak up all of that flavor and be a little something different, a little bit of a different texture from the carrots and the onions and the potatoes that are already in there. The other thing I'm going to add, and I'm adding this because I can, and I'm taking creative license, is I'm going to add peas, because I've had these peas in my freezer for a long time, and I love the idea of something a little bit different color-wise. So I'm going to go ahead and add some peas. I know they're not strictly Irish stew ingredients, but I like them. I love peas. And also, I think it adds a little bit more of a color interest. So as this is coming to a boil, adding our peas in there. And by the way, plastic bags, like zip top bags of any kind, food storage bags, these are expensive. If you have been using one for something, let's say that you're not eating any animal-based products, and so you have used it for frozen vegetables or bread or something, if it's dirty or dusty on the inside, turn it inside out, wash it in your sink, not in your dishwasher. If you wash it in your dishwasher, you'll lose it. But turn it inside out so that all the edges are out in the corners. Wash it in your sink and let it dry inside out. Then turn it back right side in. And since you have not put anything animal-based that will rot in quite the same way or get gross or give you food poisoning the same way, once it's been rinsed out and dried, use it again. As I said, these bags are really expensive, and if you store a lot of your food, then you will end up spending a lot more money than if you try and save those bags and use them again, which is what I always try to do. And it's a lot easier to do that now that I'm not storing any meat in them. Because if you store meat in one of those bags, I don't know about you, but there's no amount of washing that I would be comfortable with that would allow me to use it for anything ever again. So I'm just adding a little tiny bit more flour to thicken this up. All right. And the frozen peas cooled down the stew just a little bit, so it slowed down the cooking process. The boiling process that was happening. So that's all right. We're not in a huge hurry. Just stir all this back in, get that flour really worked into soup mixture. It's already thickening up really nicely. Potatoes help. Okay. Once all of that flour is integrated, lovely. I'm going to check my potatoes. Ooh, hot. Almost there on the potatoes. And now is also the time where I really want to start keeping an eye on my Brussels sprouts and my shallots, because while I want the Brussels sprouts to get crispy, I don't want them to disappear. And when they're cut that thinly, that's the risky run. See, so we've got some nice crispy ones off to the side. So I'm going to pull those into the middle and push the ones, oh, this is going to be so good. Hooray. So all the stuff that's very, very brown, I'm pulling into the middle of the pan. And all the stuff that's still kind of bright green, including the onions, or bright white, including the onions, shallots, I'm going to spread out to the sides a little bit. So this is not perfect. It's going to be so good. And our stew is boiling. So what I'm going to do, stirring the whole time. I've got my can of Irish Stout here. I'm going to pour this in. And this has not been in the fridge, by the way. It's been sitting at room temperature so that it doesn't disturb the temperature of the boiling stew. So you can see I'm pouring it in quite slowly. And even though I'm pouring it in slowly, it's foaming up like crazy, which is good because you don't want a stew that's full of alcohol. You're using this stout for the texture and the flavor, not because of the booze in it. So apparently this has a little thing in there. Interesting. It says, the ingenious floating draft flow system enables you to enjoy the creamy head of Murphy's from a can. Well, that's kind of a moot point here, but thank you. It's very considerate. So we're going to let this come back up to a boil. Oh, it smells like an Irish pub. You stick your head over the top of this stew pan. I'm going to let that do its thing. I'm going to move some of this stuff that I don't need anymore out of the way. Bear with me for just a moment while I organize my workspace. Rid of all the things that I don't want to need in my way. Okay. And we'll get ready to make our potatoes. So for the potatoes, what I want to do, these potatoes are done. So I'm going to drain them, of course. I'm draining them right on top of the dirty dishes so that all that boiling water helps me clean up later. Don't work hard, work smart, as they say. Or both. Probably better to do both. So here are our potatoes in our nice little pot. I'll turn off the stove because I don't want these to keep cooking any longer. I'm going to stir my Irish stew as it is starting to get very bubbly and foamy. I'm going to turn it down a hair because I want it to simmer without boiling over. So there's that. And, oh, yes, perfect. So here is a perfect pan of roasted vegetables. You see that the Brussels sprouts are still kind of green, but they're also crispy. And the shallots are cooked all the way through. They're soft. Some of them are caramelized. That is exactly what we were hoping for. I'm going to set them off to the side. I'm going to get a spoon because I know I'm going to want to taste these for seasonings once we've gotten into it. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons. I usually do about a tablespoon of plant-based butter per potato, adjusting as to how big the potatoes are, more or less. So 2 tablespoons of plant-based butter. And I'm adding a 1/4 cup of plant-based sour cream. This, by far, the Forager brand, is stellar. It tastes just like sour cream, and it actually has probiotics, made with probiotics, so it's fairly decent for you as well. It actually has some nutritional value, which is more than you can say for a lot of the sour creams on the market. And so once we have the butter, the plant-based butter, and the sour cream in there, we're going to go ahead and whip it up. I already know I'm going to want a little bit of pepper in here. I'm also going to add just a tiny splash of plant-based milk so that it's not too thick. I don't want it to bind up together. I want it to be soft and smooth. So I'm going to add my pepper. Okay. Mix it up again. Perfect. All right. So here with the potatoes, we have the base for our colcannon, which is really just mashed potatoes. So good. And because we added salt to the boiling water for the potatoes, it really doesn't need that much more, just a tiny sprinkle. And then on top of those potatoes, I'm going to add, oh, that's so hot. I'm going to add the sprouts and the shallots. So right from the pan, making sure that the crispy bits get right in there. I'm not going to add this whole pan because it is an awful lot of sprouts and shallots. And you don't want it to be overpowered. You want it to be a good mixture. So here we have kind of a nouveau colcannon with sprouts and shallots rather than cabbage and onions or leeks. Oh man, talk about comfort food. This is comfort food. So let me show you what this looks like. Put a good helping in there. Get rid of this. It would be a cooking class if I didn't drop at least 4 parts. So that's how we know we're doing it right. All right. So here is our colcannon. I know it doesn't look beautiful, but I feel fairly certain. Let me get a good spoonful here. So I've got the mashed potatoes, I've got the sprouts, I've got the caramelized shallots. Okay. So this is the kind of food you want to run off to the corner and growl over if anyone comes near you. That is comfort food to the millionth degree. The sprouts, I made too many, but can you ever have too many sprouts? I'll eat these just by themselves. So I probably could have made more potatoes, but since I'm the only one eating tonight, I didn't want to overdo it. We still got a few minutes on our stew. So let's go ahead and make our shamrock shake while we're waiting for the stew to get done. This is going to be fun. Get my colcannon out of the way. Get a nice glass, a clear one, so you can see what's going on. And let me bring all of the ingredients for our shamrock shake, front and center. Here we go. So we have here the ever popular and handy Vitamix. I love this thing. It will pulverize anything and do it elegantly in oil. So we're going to add A half cup first of plant-based milk. With the Vitamix, you should always put the liquids in first. For whatever reason, that seems to make it work better. And then out of the freezer, I'm going to get this stuff, which is a coconut milk frozen dessert. So basically, vegan ice cream is what we're dealing with here. And we're going to measure out half a cup of that as well. Oh my goodness, I should have taken this out of the freezer. You know what? I'm going to defrost this for just a couple of seconds, hopefully. Please hold. Okay, and while that's doing that, I'm going to measure out the vanilla, half teaspoon. Half teaspoon of that. And peppermint extract, half teaspoon of that. Okay, let's see if that helped any. Helped immensely, super. Still frozen, but now I can actually get to it. So I'm just packing this frozen non-dairy dessert into the half cup measure. Oh, heck, let's just say one more spoonful for color. Okay. You know, it doesn't feel exactly like ice cream, but it tastes pretty good. I'm not sad about that. Cool. Ice cream is one of those things where substitutes are very hard to find, and I don't miss it as much as I thought I would, so I don't really pursue them, but it's nice when you find one that works. And then just a drop of green food coloring. If you don't want to use food coloring, then no, it just won't be green, that's all. You can tell people it's an invisible shamrock shake. So low, pretty low setting. This is not anything that has to be ground to pieces. So helps you turn it on. Helps you plug it in too. I rearranged my kitchen the other day, and so I'm still learning how I'm doing things. All right. It's not the most efficient thing in the world in some ways, but it is kind of helpful in other ways. So now it's on. Woo, bright green. Maybe a little lighter. Okay. Beautiful. Oh, this is so much fun. So here we have our shamrock shake. Nice and thick. And a half cup of that non-dairy frozen dessert and a half cup of milk makes almost this perfect glass full. But we're not done because it is that time of year, and a lot of us have those telltale green boxes in our freezers that say Thin Mints on them. And I have good news for you. Thin Mints are vegan. One of those things that are accidentally vegan. So if you have Thin Mints in your house, oh, this one crushed up too big. I can't really put that in there. Then I strongly recommend covering the top of your shamrock shake with crushed Thin Mints. Let me get yet another spoon out of here. I don't have a straw, so I'm going to dip in and get some Thin Mint and some shamrock shake. Oh my. You know, I don't usually do desserts, but this is really hitting the spot. It's very vanilla-y because of this stuff and just a little bit of vanilla extract, and it's not overpoweringly minty. A lot of the problems that I have with mint flavored things is that they're just overwhelming you with that mint flavor, but this is just right. I could have made it a little bit greener, I suppose, but I get freaked out by too much food coloring, so I just wanted a hint of green. So let me show that to you. Nice pale green. Got the crushed thin mints on top. And since it's all plant-based, it's entirely good for you. That's not true. You can scratch that off of the record. It was a joke. And a good time because our stew, let's check the potatoes to make sure the potatoes are done. I can grab one here. Yes, perfect. All right. So we're finishing with our main course, but that has never bothered me before. And I'm not too fussed about it here. So let's get a good ladle full of this wonderful hearty stew, plenty of mushrooms, good potatoes. What else do I want to do here? Yes, cooked onions, another little carrot. Okay, let me get a spoon. This is so rich looking. Trying to show it to you without spilling it, but it's this beautiful, deep, rich brown color. Piping hot, I might add. But I really want to try one of these mushrooms that was roasted first and then added to the mix. Hot. Come on. You saw. Mushrooms texture is outstanding. But it does need salt. Let's add it to the big pot. And I'll add a little sprinkle. Fine. But the other flavorings are very much in line. It's the mushrooms contribute a beautiful flavor to it. Onions and garlic, of course. Let's taste just some of this broth and see if it cooked up as nicely as I thought it would when I opened that little tiny package. This is wonderful. So the broth and the stock, or the broth and the stout, and all of the vegetables combined make this a beautiful, beautiful, cool weather soup. And I know it's been a little colder these past few days than some of us would have liked, but this is the perfect antidote. It's great for St. Patrick's Day, but honestly, this is a great soup for any time, especially when it's chilly. It's very rich. It's going to thicken up more and more and more from the stout and the flour as it cooks and then as it cools down. And I would be willing to bet, and I'll update you on this tomorrow, I'd be willing to bet this is going to be one of those soups that tastes even better the next day than it does on the first. And it tastes really good now. So enjoy it with your cool cannon and your thin mint shamrock shake. But whatever you're doing tonight, please stay safe. I know it's St. Patrick's Day, but we are still in the middle of, like a global pandemic. So please don't go out and get too crazy. Please don't breathe on anybody. Please don't play the bagpipes on top of anybody and put bagpipe air all over them. And please, whatever you're doing, be safe. And remember that you were created for love, by love. So please go out and be love. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. Thank you for being here. Good night.